Hi everyone, thanks for having me today. It's wonderful to be here for this session on enabling hybrid work at scale. My name is Ben Smit. I am the CEO and co-founder at Teamgage, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is a hot button issue for many industries across the world at the moment as we grapple with how working conditions are changing and how people want to engage with work. So what better place to be than the Future of Work event to talk about that. So I want to give you a little bit of background into Teamgage just quickly so that you understand where our approach is coming from. So we offer customers a platform that essentially helps their teams work more effectively together. So using that continuous improvement cycle to build on what's good and get rid of what's not. I think that context is important in the discussion around hybrid work, and the types of clients that we work with are varied, hugely varied, in a multitude of industries, from energy to finance and banking to elite sport to government to technology. They're all grappling with a very similar problem, which is that when you have people in an organization, what is the most effective way to work with them and to give them the best experience, and then to in turn have the organization as a whole perform at its best. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context into who we are and what we do. And I thought I'd start this topic with just looking at some of the research that's come out recently around changes to the work environment. I think the first one you'll probably be fairly familiar with. This is from an EY study, which you'll see referenced there, and looking at around 16,000 employees, so a fairly major study. And I think quite intuitively this result makes sense. 9 out of 10 people want to be able to work flexibly in the future. I think that's a no-brainer. But the one that is perhaps more interesting to follow that up is the second one here, around that over half of the people they looked at were considering leaving their organization if flexible work wasn't managed properly. And managed well, what does that mean? Well, there's a myriad of different potentials there, but I think for many organizations this is a scary statistic. Because they're just not sure what the future holds. And of course, 54% is going to include a number of really key, great, important people, in that number. So it's really important that the actions that we take now, we put into place will affect the next 6 to 12 months. So that's quite an interesting sort of statistics that have come out of that report. There's also something from the Productivity Commission recently here in Australia. And basically they found that it's going to take a number of years for us to become prepared for that next stage of how we work together. Hybrid work is certainly going to be a model that is used at various organizations, but getting that right is going to take time. And there is, another thing they found from this was that there is no one size fits all. So we need to be able to adapt, and we need to be able to adapt quickly to make that work. And of course, not everything with change is always rosy and easy. There's a really interesting peer-reviewed study that Microsoft ran during the pandemic around working remotely and the impacts that's had on its people. So they saw a big spike in productivity initially, which, okay, that seems like good news. But what they did uncover was that there were long-term hits to innovation and creativity by not having people physically together. So it's important to understand that this new environment that we're working in, there's no clear-cut answers. Depending on what you're doing is going to change what the outcomes are. But this study is a fair warning to those who think that it's just one way or the other, or will just transition smoothly and that will be it. There's other companies like Netflix who are trying to get people back into the office as quickly as possible. Obviously, a lot of what they do is heavily reliant on creativity. And even Atlassian, companies like that who are forward-looking are now trying to understand what the balance is between collaboration and things like remote work. So, do we bring people in a certain percentage of the time? They're talking about not having people so far away from the office that they can't get back in half a day or whatever it is. Understanding that relationship between working autonomously and working as a group and building a relationship as a group is really important to understand what the next steps look like. I think this list probably sums up a lot of things that organizations at the moment are struggling with. So that idea of, how do we stay connected and how do we stay within a strong culture that we've built? What are the missing elements of training and confidence in moving to things like hybrid work? What about for those where they've been forced to move to remote work or hybrid work where it actually doesn't suit them? So understanding that what some people like, some people hate, you're not going to find that one size fits all. So there's plenty of confusion and potentially tension that comes out of that. And just a long-term uncertainty around what it will mean for organizations moving forward. So I really like this this saying, and I'll just read it out to you. So organizations that limit themselves to top-down action cannot create ownership and engagement from their people. They move too slowly. So I think when we talk about things like hybrid work, we need to start thinking less in terms of big, huge, long-term changes and more in terms of small, owned, iterative changes that the teams themselves can push forwards. That ability to move rapidly and relying on great people to do work, that can't all happen from the top. It has to happen from the ground up as well. So, and we think about this in a typical organization, right? So at the moment, there's still a lot of organizations that will do something like an annual survey, or even if it's a pulse survey, it's very top down, right? Okay, here are the questions, tell us all the problems, we'll go away and solve them, we'll give you your solutions, and then we'll feed them down the chain. And of course, that's a difficult process. And as anyone in a large organization knows, working and forcing information down that chain is hugely difficult and becomes quite disruptive. Often the message just really doesn't stick as it moves down the chain. So understanding that that's probably not the way that we need to approach work now. We need to be looking at a lot of bottom up. So really what they're talking about there is we want to set our direction and our core values at the top, and then we want teams to do their best work within that framework and push things up the chain. So many frontline workers or customer facing workers know more about what it's like to be a customer than those that are in upper management. So relying on that knowledge, relying on the ability to adapt at that level and own that improvement is going to be hugely critical for teams moving forward in the next era of work. So what are we really talking about? Well, we're essentially talking about what is the continuous improvement cycle. And I've laid out a model here for you. There are variations on this model, but this is one that we advocate for. So the first thing is to actually have something that makes this whole process data driven, right? Measure what's important so that it can be improved. And that's going to involve a mix of qualitative and quantitative measures. But having a shared starting point for decision making is crucially important. And I think, moving down the chain there, then obviously you need to be able to review that information and then collaborate on that information. So from a team first perspective, we're talking about that bottom up. That means not all the information is just going to senior leaders. It's actually staying within the team level as well, so that they can look at their things that are working really well and things that need to be improved, and they can own that improvement cycle themselves. And of course, lastly, you actually need to create action to improve something. So, making sure those actions are within a framework that everyone understands and that doesn't fall into gray areas. So things like who owns the action, when is it due, they're very simple things, but also looking at, well, what is the next step? You shouldn't have to solve every problem right there and then, but at the same time, that problem shouldn't have to go to committee. So do start thinking in terms of small, iterative, continuous improvement, because the smaller the iteration, the smaller the risk, and the quicker you'll learn something new that you can implement. So bringing in that cycle, and the more cycles you can do in a year, the better, is crucial to being able to adapt both at a team level and then at an organization level as well. So I want to give you a couple of examples of organizations that we work with that do this well. The first is an example of a medical organization. So actually Flinders Medical, who run a hospital and ER department. And one of the things they did with us was to roll out this strategy of collaborating at the team level. Senior leadership gave them the permission to actually engage in that process. And I had a really great example that came out. So leaders had purchased new equipment for the ER department, and they thought, great, this is going to be amazing, an improvement for the organization, improvement for patient outcomes. Had they just left it there, they wouldn't have actually realized that it was causing more issues. in terms of the way staff had to engage with that particular equipment. So when they used their continuous improvement process with us, they were able to, at a team level, uncover these challenges. And those teams were actually able to change the way they worked with that equipment. So it wasn't that the equipment itself wasn't useful, it was that the way that it had been rolled out wasn't suitable for that team and those patients. So by working on that problem themselves and owning that problem, they came up with a solution. And in the end, they did lead to better patient outcomes, faster turnaround times, all those things they wanted to get out of it, they were able to do so by just working on that problem from the bottom up. So you can see they really systemized the improvement process, and they co-designed the work environment with their employees. The second example is actually not one of our customers, but I think it's a really interesting story. So for those of you who've heard of Zappos, they're an online retailer, predominantly shoes, but they're very, very famous for their culture around customer experience and wowing the customer. So they have empowered their customer experience teams. They do not have any scripts, right? If you call Zappos, you're not going to get a cookie cutter experience. You're going to get a customer experience rep who is motivated and empowered to give you a fantastic experience. And that's something that they've built into their brand. And there's a really great example of someone who rang up to exchange their shoes. They had an issue with the shoes that arrived, and it was a gentleman that's pictured here. Anyway, they got talking with the customer experience rep and uncovered that they actually both love teddy bears. The rep actually made teddy bears, and the guy that was calling, his colleagues had nicknamed him Teddy Bear. And as they kept talking, they spent a couple of hours on the phone, and the customer experience rep, because they were empowered, she decided she was going to actually send him along with taking care of the exchange, send him a homemade teddy bear and a 5-pound gummy bear, would you believe, and a bunch of other stuff. It turned out that he was actually in the armed forces and he was on deployment, and it ended up being this huge PR moment for the company, which went as a global story. Now, that's a fantastic interaction that they've had. There'll be plenty of companies that would have said, well, that was a waste of money. It's taking too long to deal with one customer. But Zappos understood the value of empowering their employees and the value that could lead to the brand. So I'm sure they had a massive uptick in sales just because of that interesting story. But that is something that they gave the power to that experienced rep to create something special. So you can see this is a great example of decentralizing the decision-making process, equipping team leaders to empower stories like this at different levels, and I think that's just a great outcome. The third one, just quickly, NEC, another customer of ours, who what they did was really empowering and equipping their team leaders to decentralize the improvement process. So they came out with a leader toolkit, which they rolled out across the organization, and that allowed them to kind of set the clear vision and mission of what they wanted to achieve, but then put continuous improvement in the hands of the teams and everyone within that team. So I love it, just a really simple, impactful thing where they were purposeful in setting direction, but then empowering their teams. So, what does this have to do with hybrid work? Well, I think what I'm trying to show you is that what we do in empowering our teams is what we get out in terms of good outcomes in whatever we tackle. And that definitely includes hybrid work, right? So being able to embed these steps into your improvement process on anything you do as an organization is going to lead you to better outcomes, particularly with hybrid work, where there are many challenges and there's no one size fits all, and each team is potentially going to have different challenges that they face, and the organization as a whole is going to have their challenges as well. So co-authoring the environment with with your people is really powerful. So just as a real quick recap, systemize that continuous improvement process, embed that into your organization, make sure that is the thing that your organization does culturally, co-design that future with your people, decentralize and empower them to make decisions to get better outcomes, equip the team leaders to know what they're doing. They should be the coach, not the star player, so they need to be equipped to be able to be that coach and be effective. And then lastly, make sure that whatever you do is unique to your needs, your strategy and your culture and your people. If you can do that, you're well on your way to embracing change and moving forward in a very positive way. So look, I hope you got something out of today's session. It was great talking with you. Certainly if you need any help with engaging your teams, we'd love to hear from you, or just any questions you have following up this session. We'd love to, I'd personally love for you to reach out and let me know what those questions are. But thank you very much for listening, and good luck on your continuous improvement journey.